Welcome to That Bible Guy and to the continuation of our series on the book of Romans. Today we come to Romans 14. What we're going to look at today is dealing with disputable matters. So, dealing with disputable matters. I love Romans 14. When I discovered it as a young Christian, it really did change my thinking greatly. But what I want to just share for a moment is the fact that as a very young Christian, I had a very sensitive conscience. When I first became a Christian, all them years ago, there's a lot of different things that other Christians were doing that I found really difficult to deal with. There was one particular house that I was in, a brother's flat, as we would call them, flat with other Christians in it, and they had a satanic Bible. Now, they weren't reading it in a positive sense, but they were curious and were looking into it. Maybe someone they were reaching out to had it, but I remember being very, very annoyed that it was even in their house, and we had a big argument about that. There was also music that some Christians were listening to, and I thought they had the occasional questionable lyrics, and I didn't sit well with me. Or they'd watch movies that had maybe scenes in them that weren't terrible, but still weren't helpful for my mind. As a young, sensitive Christian, I wasn't happy that they were watching these. I remember particularly when I first became a Christian, and it was around the time that a TV program called Big Brother had started up, and some of the Christians were watching this on television. Not that long after I came out of the waters of baptism, and I remember thinking, sitting there bewildered that this was on TV. And now, to be fair, there was only the occasional swear word, and it was maybe bleeped out. But it was the whole ethos of the program for me. It didn't sit right with me, and I think I was very judgmental at the time, and I couldn't understand how anyone, a Christian, could watch this. Um, couldn't believe what other Christians were doing. Now, this is the context in which Paul is talking here in Romans 14 about Christians with a weak faith. He's not looking down on them because of a weak faith, but he is taking the position of someone who's not of a weak faith. And he says in Romans 14, verses 1 through to 4, he says, "Accept him whose faith is weak without quarreling over disputable matters. One person's faith allows him to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master, to their own master's servants stand or fall, and they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand." So Paul gives us, he's talking to those who have a weak faith, who do certain things or don't do certain things, and says, don't pass judgment on what he calls here disputable matters. As I say, Paul was in a position as a strong Christian, so he's not saying it was right to have a weak faith in these areas. He felt that the things he allowed himself to do, eat meat, as he talked about elsewhere, sacrifice the idols, was okay. If someone else thinks it isn't, that's okay for them. He's not saying, he's saying his position is probably right, but it's not right dependent on conscience. A lot of it is about conscience. But these words, I believe, in Romans 14 are critical for all Christians, regardless of what side you fall on here. These are very important words for us. Now, it talks about the term here in NIV, quarreling over disputable matters. This is the Greek word dialogismos. Dialogismos. And it's basically referring to different tones or viewpoints. So there's people with different viewpoints. It's going to be everywhere we go. And New English Bible says doubtful points. NIV says disputable matters. RSV just talks about opinions. Dialogismos, different opinions. But as it describes here, disputable differences in opinions. Non-essential difference in opinions. Where we do not tend to agree. But also, what Paul is saying here on these disputable matters, dialogismos, is we don't actually need to agree. It's okay that we don't agree. And this is really important words for Christians, regardless of what side you fall on here. Now, he gives advice to both parties here in verse 3. The one who eats everything, we'll get the context in a second. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not. And then the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does. For God accepts both of them. God accepts them. And interestingly, he said it to the one who was judging. God accepts them. The other one might look down on them, But the one who was judging the other one, they're saying, look, God still accepts him. So there's advice for both. Now, there's two possible contexts here. The simple context from 1 Corinthians 8 is Paul's talking about meat sacrificed to idols. They buy it in the meat market, had already been sacrificed to an idol. How can anyone eat this? And Paul was saying, look, you buy the food, you didn't sacrifice it to an idol. In your conscience, you're giving thanks to God for the food. It nullifies the fact that it was sacrificed to an idol. However, if you see it as only been sacrificed to an idol and can't eat it, then for you, it's unclean. Don't eat it. That's one context. The other possible context is just talking to the Jews who were still stringent Jews, ceremonial Jews who followed the laws of Judaism. They still only eat kosher foods, kosher meats. There's only certain types of meats and foods, and in terms of its preparation, as to whether they'd eat it or not. They still followed Sabbath days and festivals, as it talks about in verse 5 there. They still follow all the Jewish rituals and laws, whereas other people didn't. And Paul was saying, we don't need to follow these things anymore, but if you feel like you do, then for you, that's okay. As it says in verse 5, one person considers one day important, another person doesn't. It doesn't matter. It's just a special day. It doesn't make a difference, really. So it could be either scenario. Either way, I think either works, to be honest, because they both fit with that type of context. So what Paul is saying, some advice then for the people involved here, and then we'll look at ourselves, which is obviously what we're interested in, is it says, accept them whose faith is weak without quarreling. So the first thing is not quarreling about matters which are disputable. The second thing that I like in verse 13, it says, let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind to not put a stumbling block in your brother's or sister's way. So stop passing judgment. So it's not just about the action anymore, about quarreling or arguing about this. It's actually going further back and saying, look, in your actual mind, don't pass judgment. Like, that's difficult to do. Don't even pass judgment on this. Now, we'll get more in a little moment about the breakdown of the strong and the weak here. And we're not talking about weak in a negative sense here, because Paul doesn't make that the issue. But some modern situations for us, and you may think of more, you may feel like some of these are not disputable, that we're open for that. That's what this is all about. But I've got a list of things here that for me are probably fairly disputable. Now, please keep in mind, I'm talking about a spectrum and degrees of position here. For instance, I'll mention alcohol. You might then turn around and say to me, well, you're not saying it's okay to get drunk. I'm not saying it's okay to get drunk. That's not disputable. Galatians 5:19, it's clearly not disputable. But whether you drink alcohol or not is disputable to some people. Some people feel it should never touch your lips. Now, I don't agree with that. I think it's okay to have a glass of wine, but that's one of the potential issues. Not so common anymore, maybe. We've just had one yesterday, Halloween. That's a disputable matter for people. Some people, most people probably think it's okay, provided that you don't do it for Satan worship and worship in evil. And it's, you get your kids dressed up in fancy costumes and pumpkin costumes, that it means something different than what it could mean or what it meant to some others. Some Christians feel it's not acceptable at all. So it can become an issue which we feel is quite disputable. Celebration of Christmas even. Some people see it as a pagan ritual, pagan festival. So some of that can seem disputable. End times, or belief in end times. Are we in our end times? Is there a mark of the beast? When will Jesus return? How will that come about? So prophecies connected with that, that can be disputable. The nature of heaven and hell. Will we go straight to heaven when we die? We've had some of these conversations in the church recently. Or will we go straight into the presence of God? Or we will have soul sleep. Some of these are kind of disputable matters. We'll get to why in a moment. Alcohol, teetotalism, if you like. Clothing that we wear. And now, obviously, again, if it's very revealing clothing, that might not feel like a disputable matter to you. But I'm talking about degrees along of positions here. Veganism, eating meat at all. Some people morally feel this is an outrage. So that's another what you would consider to be a disputable matter. Again, we'll say about why in a moment. Old Testament prophecies, have they all been fulfilled? Are some not been fulfilled? Disputable matter. Now, I'll get on to a few here. Political positions, how we feel about politics and whether we slant towards one position or another can be a disputable matter. The Sabbath, whether we keep the Sabbath today or not. And there's a few more modern ones here that we might feel when I even say these things, you may feel like that's not disputable. Again, I'm not talking about a few things. Environmentalism. And I'm not talking about caring for the environment. Clearly, again, I don't think we should get drunk, as I feel like we shouldn't ignore the environment. We need to do all we can. But the whole idea of having it as a sort of number one philosophy in our life, environmentalism can be a disputable matter. Feminism, the degrees of feminism that you believe in can be a disputable matter. Even racism and the degree of problem that we have or how we should deal with it can become another bit of a disputable matter. Now, when I say disputable matter, I'm basically saying that the Bible's either silent on the topic or it's equivocal. It's not unequivocal. It's not unambiguous. It's quite ambiguous as to the level of change that we need to make in our life as a result of it. So the other thing I said I would do, these are some modern examples. Let me know if you know of more. There certainly are more. And again, it's degrees there that I'm talking about. But in terms of the positions the weak and the strong were to take here, how do we deal with each group? Paul was in the strong group here, if you like, and writing from that vantage point. But for the group, we felt that it isn't essential. In this context, what they eat, the Sabbath days, special days, it's not essential. You can follow them or you're not following them. It's not essential. It's disputable. For them, the instruction for them was, don't look down on those who do keep them. Don't look down on others. It was, don't quarrel about these days. It was, don't pass any judgment, verse 13, on those who keep these days. Let them practice them. These things I said, if people believe that they shouldn't celebrate Halloween, 100% fine. If you don't believe you should celebrate it in any way, shape, or form, from my point of view, that's absolutely fine. I'll not pass judgment. I'll not quarrel. I'll let you practice not celebrating. That's absolutely fine. That's that group's position. Again, about needing meat sacrificed to an idol. The other position then, one group, we felt that it was essential. You can't eat that meat. You can't not celebrate this day. It's essential that you do. For them, as it says in verse 3, they must not judge those who don't keep them, because it's a disputable matter. And don't let, as it said later on, which I really like, in verse 16, is that you consider good, don't let it be spoken of as evil. So explain why you do this. Why is this important? Be able to explain why you keep this day, why you don't keep this day, why you eat this food or you don't eat this food. Be able to explain why it's important to you. Now, as I said, Paul's writing in the position of the strong here, but not looking down on. It's not about one against another. It's not about that at all. And he's saying it isn't essential. But the problem lies here for the group who felt that it was. And this, for me, is where the greatest burden might lie. It's easier for the person who thinks it's non-essential to say, all right, I'll let you keep on doing it. It's not a big deal. But for the person who feels it's essential, this is where the challenge lies, I feel. And this is the other side from Paul's position here. The burden lies more, for me, with that second group. And how will they continue on something that they don't feel is disputable? Now, obviously, when that group needs to talk to other brothers and sisters, they need to get advice, they need to study this stuff out, they need to be able to see why it's possible that this might be a disputable matter. They need to decide on whether it is actually disputable or not. Now, here's a little bit of advice, and I've thought through myself in dealing with issues like this, even at the moment, in issues that are in the church at the minute. We need to decide, is the issue relevant to my personal relationship with God, or does it affect corporate worship of God? So if it's a personal thing, whether I celebrate Halloween or not, celebrate Christmas or not, whether I keep the Sabbath or not, whether I'm a vegan or not, this is personally affecting your relationship with God. And if the whole church doesn't do it or does do it, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect my standing before God. There are, unfortunately, though, other issues, whether we decide they're disputable or not, really do matter. Some of them are probably coming up in the future. For instance, women's roles. I'm not getting into it now, and I will put up videos on it very soon. That's going to affect our corporate worship. Some who feel that and again, there's degrees of difference with this as well. Those who feel it's fine, egalitarianism, women do what men do, it doesn't matter. The burden will lie with them. I'm saying them at the moment. I haven't categorized my own position, but the burden will lie there. Because, well, what about those who don't agree that they should do that in a corporate worship setting? So, and those who feel that it isn't okay, then how do they deal with those of difference of opinion? So I'm just saying that at the moment. I know it's coming up. But that's different than individual worship. So some of these don't really matter as much because you can keep your position and hopefully keep practicing Romans 14. But some of them might influence how we worship, and that's where they are a little bit more important because they influence what we do. Either way, just to finish off, slightly longer today, just to finish off, dealing with the disputable matters. There are many disputable matters, and Paul is addressing the weak here as a strong member, but that's not what it's about. He's saying, don't pass judgment on disputable matters. Don't put a stumbling block in their way. Don't quarrel over these things. Don't bring them up. Don't quarrel about them. Don't pass judgment. Let's both live our Christian life in whatever way we feel fit as it matters, lots of things that are matters of conscience. Hopefully this has helped us today, got us thinking a bit more. Maybe I'd like to say more on it, but I don't want to go on too long. I will be back again soon with other material and some of the stuff I discussed today. Thanks so much for listening. If you like it today, please hit like. The mantra, please share it on for other people to get engaged in this conversation. Please subscribe to That Bible Guy if you haven't already. And thanks so much for watching today. Let's get his word out there.